Hello, sexy people. This is Jackie here with the Sexy Politico, bringing you a new episode of the Sexy Politico podcast. As promised, this episode is our monthly overview of women in the armed forces, and today I've chosen to focus on the Marines. We can't forget that the government is more than just the men and women who serve as executives or judges or legislators, and we should look at all of the women who make our country work. So let's begin. I'm going to split this episode up by decades, since by golly, the Marines keep very detailed records. Most of the information I have found is on womenmarines.org if you'd like to find out more information. I will list that website in the show notes as well. Just like the Army, there are some legends surrounding who the first female Marine is. The Marines have been around in one form or another since 1775, so I'm surprised there aren't more legendary women Marines, but apparently there was no privacy and a very strict physical exam, so it was kind of hard to get away with being a woman from what I gather. Lucy Brewer, or Eliza Bowen, or Louisa Baker, is the pen name of a writer who was said to be the first woman in the United States Marines, serving aboard the USS Constitution as a sharpshooter in the 1800s while pretending to be a man named George Baker. Brewer's adventures were probably written by Nathaniel Hill Wright or Wright's publisher Nathaniel Coverley. No one by the name of Lucy Brewer or that of her other pseudonyms or that of her husband can be found in the historical records. Brewer's book, The Female Marine, had identifying details of the Constitution's travels and battles that are nearly verbatim to accounts published by the ship's commanders in contemporary newspapers. Now, so who's the real first female Marine? That'd be Opha May Johnson. She joined the Marine Corps Reserves on August 13th, 1918 during World War I. She's basically first. From then until the end of World War I, 305 women enlisted in the Marines. They were often nicknamed Marinettes, that's how I'm guessing that's pronounced, and helped with the office duties in the Marine Corps headquarters so that men who usually work in administrative roles could be sent to France to help fight in World War I. Now let's fast forward to World War II and December 7th, 1941, a day that will live in infamy, as FDR stated, in the day that the United States entered World War II. On October 31st of 1942, Secretary of the Navy Frank Knox authorized the Marine Corps to create a separate women's reserve and accept female applicants for commissions and enlistments during America's involvement in World War II. And on November 7th, 1942, Commandant Lieutenant General Thomas Holcomb approved the formation of the Marine Corps Women Reserves. So in 1943, Colonel Ruth Cheney Streeter became the director of the Marine Corps Women Marine Reservists, and the same year, Captain Ann Lentz became its first commissioned officer. That February 13th, 1943, enlistments officially opened, and Private Lucille McLaren, she became the first enlisted Marine. A month later, the first class of 71 officer candidates entered the U.S. Naval Midship School at Mount Holyoke, Massachusetts, and began training with the Waves. So that's the Navy's version of the female Marines, later that same month. And the first class of 722 enlisted women reservists began training at the U.S. Naval Training School at Hunter College in the Bronx, New York, once again training with the Waves. The first class of enlisted graduates graduated in April of April of 43, and reported to active duty. Approximately 525 women entered every 2 weeks for courses that averaged about 4 weeks. The first class of officer candidates graduated in May of 43 and reported to duty. These classes averaged about 70 candidates and began every month and lasted for 8 weeks. 1 year later, February 13, 1944, the organization had grown from 4 women to 15,000 women, and the women's reservists held more than 200 different assignments. Now that September, the president, so that would be President Roosevelt, allowed women to go overseas. And so that next January, the first detachment of 5 officers and 160 enlisted women Marines arrived in Hawaii. Remember, Hawaii wasn't a state yet. So VE Day, which was May 7th, 1945, which is Victory in Europe Day, the Marine Women's Reserves limited their recruitment to just replacements because they knew the war was almost over. Because September 2nd, 1945 was VJ Day, Victory in Japan Day, and so all recruiting was stopped and plans began for a gradual demobilization of the over 20,000 women Marines who served in over 225 different specialties, filling 85% of the jobs at Marine Corps headquarters. So what they did decide in June of 47 was that they needed to keep a small nucleus of women on duty to serve as replacements in case there's another emergency. But the first ending date of the Marine Women's Reserves was September 1st, and all the women's reserve units were disbanded. Most of the women returned to civilian life. But also in March of 47, we had the first female Marine, U.S. Marine Corps women Marine, Sergeant Mary Franks of Bobtown, Pennsylvania, became the first woman Marine to rate a hash mark. So that means she completed 4 years of service. On June 12, 1948, is a banner year. We talked about this with the Army podcast. The Women's Armed Services Integration Act went through. The Women's Marines authorized 100 regular women Marine officers, 10 warrant officers, and 1,000 enlisted Marine women to join the regular Marines in a gradual buildup over 2 years. And they decided to pull these Marines from women who were in the women's reserve units. So as we're moving through the 40s and into the 50s, on November 4th, 1948, the first 3 women officers were sworn into the regular Marine Corps. Colonel Catherine Towley became the director of the Women Marines. So women Marines had their own director for a while. And later that month, the first 8 enlisted women were sworn in as regular Marines. In February of 49, the Marines began training newly enlisted women, so women who had not served in World War II, into the regular Marines, and also Black female Marines were being enlisted. Women who had served in the Marine Corps Reserves were mobilized into the regular Marines for the Korean War, and some women stayed. But the number of women peaked at a strength of 2,787 active duty women Marines during the Korean War. But the women were starting to integrate into the regular Marines, and they got a dress uniform in 1950. Catherine Towley introduced a dress uniform that was patterned after the full dress uniform of the male Marine officers. And in 52, on the 9th anniversary of the establishment of the Women's Marine Corps, the Lady Leathernecks, as they called themselves, participated for the first time in the color raising ceremony at the Marine Barracks in Washington, D.C. In 53, Colonel Towley retired and Lieutenant Colonel Julia Hamblett became the new director of female Marines. There's not going to be many of these. In 1953, Staff Sergeant Barbara Olive Barnwell became the first female Marine to be awarded the Navy and Marine Corps Medal for Heroism for saving a fellow Marine from drowning in the Atlantic Ocean in 1952, so a year before that. That same year, Ruth Wood and Lillian Hartley became the first women to enter the Warrant Officer Program. Now, let's move a little bit further into the 60s. So the 60s are going to be a new era for women Marines because we have the Vietnam War. At this point, the U.S. had been involved in Vietnam since November of 55, and female Marines started moving towards equality, and they were going to war. So we're at 1960. The first woman Marine is promoted to an E9, Master Gunnery Sergeant Geraldine M. Warren. And that next year, the first woman Marine is promoted to Sergeant Major, which is also an E9 in the Marines, Bertha Peters Billup. January 2nd, 1964, Lieutenant Colonel Barbara J. Bishop succeeds Colonel Margaret M. Henderson as Director of the Women's Marines. In 1965, the Marine Corps assigns the first woman attaché. That same year, Staff Sergeant Josephine Gerbers becomes the first woman Marine to be awarded a Combat Action Ribbon. So that means she was in a place where there was combat. Gerbers was an intelligence officer, and she worked as an administrative assistant to the Air Force Attaché in Santo Domingo. In 1965, Rose Franco becomes the first Hispanic woman promoted to Chief Warrant Officer. And in 1967, Master Sergeant Barbara Dolinsky becomes the first female Marine to serve in a combat zone in Vietnam. She is assigned to the U.S. Military Assistance Command in Vietnam combat operations in Saigon. So at the peak of the Vietnam War, there were approximately 2,700 women Marines on active duty serving both stateside and overseas. Well, in 1968, Lieutenant Colonel Jenny Wren becomes the first woman Marine to attend Command and Staff College. So this is an important time for female Marines. They're starting to go overseas. They're starting to do more jobs. They're being allowed to go to more dangerous places. As we move into the 70s, more things start to open up and things start to become more equal for women in the armed forces. Hi, this is Jackie with the Sexy Politico. I hope you're liking what you're listening to right now, and if you could, take a moment, please leave a rating, leave a comment. Just let us know how we're doing, because it really helps us at the end. And also, please, if you have the time, take a look at our Patreon. It's really important to help us expand if we know that we have supporters and we have the funds to make better quality podcasts, YouTube videos, writing for you. Thank you. So we're in the 1970s, and we have First Lieutenant Patricia Murphy was named the first woman Marine as a certified military judge that year. And in a really big step for equality, 1972, Lieutenant Colonel Carolyn Walsh, commanding officer of the Women's Officer School, was the first female officer allowed to remain on duty while pregnant. That same year, Lieutenant Catherine Kortrek Genovese was the first female battalion adjunct at Weapons Training Battalion at Quantico. She was the first female officer to fire a respectable 301 by 400, I don't know what that means, to a rate of sharpshooter. I know what that means. She can hit a gun, she can shoot things really well. Since at that time it wasn't authorized for her uniform, she wore her sharpshooter medal underneath her tie. In 1973, Sergeant Major Bertha Billups was the first woman Marine to retire with 30 years continuous service. And in that same year, Elizabeth A. Eitel Oblast was the first female to join the U.S. Marine Band. That in 1973, Colonel Mary E. Bain, the first female to become a commanding officer of Headquarters and Service Battalion at the Marine Corps Base in Pendleton. And now 74 is a big year. In 1974, we had the first Marine tank mechanic, we had the first female policewoman, and the first officer in the police field. Captain Shirley Bowen was the first female to graduate with the 34 weeks Advanced Communications Officer course. And Women's Officer School integrated into the mail companies, and First Lieutenant Catherine Kortrek Genovese, as we talked about before, the sharpshooter, was the first female officer to design and teach her own course of instruction. And lastly, 1974 was the disestablishment of the position of Sergeant Major of Women Marines. So there's no longer the person who's head of Women Marines. There's no special role of somebody to take care of the woman Marine. In 75, we had the first female instructor at the Personnel and Administrative School in Quantico. Karen Pressler, the first female assigned to instructor staff of all reserve male units. First Lieutenant Diane George was the first female to integrate into an all-male security force at Camp Lejeune, and First Sergeant Margaret Reiber, along with First Sergeant Margaret Reiber. In 1976, Private Beth Ann Fraser was the first female Marine to attend Army Airborne School at Fort Benning. In 77, Private First Class Katie Dixon becomes the first female jet mechanic. And in 77 as well, Rhonda M. Tower was the first female enlisted Marine to attend and graduate the Defense Language Institute, where she studied Mandarin Chinese. In that same year, Gunnery Sergeant Mary Vaughn was the first African-American woman to become warrant officer. We also had in 77 the first female platoon commander, and because the Marine Corps Officer Candidate School at Quantico was gender integrated that year. In 78, we had Margaret A. Brewer became a brigadier general, and she was the first female general in the Marine Corps history. In 1978, Private First Class Myra Jepson is the first female Marine honor guard at the White House, and this is during the Carter administration. Now, as we move into the 80s, we have more firsts, but also it starts feeling more natural and usual to see female Marines doing any job as opposed to just being in the clerical department. It's 1980. And Reagan is president, and Sergeant Major Ellie Judge becomes the first female Sergeant Major of Marine Corps Base Camp Pendleton. That same year, 7 female midshipmen were the first to be commissioned into the Marine Corps from a U.S. Naval Academy, or the U.S. Naval Academy, excuse me. It's not like there's a lot of them. Also, in 1980, Sergeant Major Barbara Farrell is the first female to be assigned to Assault Amphibian School at Camp Pendleton. Now, in 1982, the first female rifle platoon was led by Lieutenant Marie Juliano. Now, in 1984, Colonel Elaine Alberson Chapman becomes the first female staff judge advocate. That same year, Elaine Bowden becomes the first female officer to serve as a G1 of the 1st Marine Amphibious Force in Okinawa, Japan. Now, in 1985, year I was born, Private Anita Lobo sends a new range record with the first series of recruits required to qualify with the M16A1 at Parris Island, and female officers were allowed to possess and train with the sword, because Marine uniforms are cool because they get swords. In 1986, Rhonda Amtoir, after being commissioned, then Captain Le Brusque, served as the first female Marine attaché serving at the U.S. Consulate in Hong Kong from 86 to 88. In 1986, Sergeant Rhonda Conrad, as a member of the Marine Corps shooting team, was authorized to wear the Smokey Bear. It's a hat, she's not dressed up as a bear. I had to Google that, but it's an important hat to Marines. In 1987, she became the first female distinguished with the pistol. In 1988, Brigadier General Gail Reels is the first female to command Marine Corps Base Quantico. And also in 88, CMC Alfred Gray announces basic warrior training would extend to all recruits, male and female. So all recruits, male and female, as of 88, had the same basic warrior training. Also in 88, Colonel Carol A. Mutter is the first female of any of the services to gain the qualification as Space Director, running the first on the CINC Space Command Director crew, and then the entire command crew, and then the Command Center operations. In 1989, Colonel Eileen M. Albertson Chapman is the first female appellate military judge, and that same year, Major Doris Daniels is the first African-American female to achieve the rank of lieutenant colonel. So, The 80s was a pretty big year, pretty important for female equality and female empowerment in the Marines. And now we're going to move on to the 90s when women start being able to do more in combat roles. It's 1990. New president in town, Daddy Bush. So in 1990, 1,000 women Marines were deployed for Operation Desert Storm or Operation Desert Shield. In 1992, Gunnery Sergeant Melody Knotts became the first female to don the flat-brimmed Smokey Bear as a drill instructor. In 1992, Sergeant Roxanne Conrad competes in the Barcelona Olympic Games, and she also competes in the 91 and 95 Pan American Games in the shooting category, and she won a medal too. In 1992, Chief Warrant Officer Roxanne Conrad is the first female range officer at Parris Island. I'm kind of confused when I was trying to look this up. I believe that these two women are the same women, but I cannot confirm that the same Roxanne Conrad competed in the Olympics and also was the Chief Warrant Officer who was the first female range officer at Parris Island. It was weird there could be two women who both served in the Marines at the exact same time named Roxanne Conrad, and I think they're the same person, but I'm not 100% sure. In 1992, Gunnery Sergeant Joan Straub was the first female permanently assigned to an aircraft carrier, the USS Independence. That same year, Lieutenant Colonel Ginger Jaddox is the first female to command a Marine Corps security company in Frankfurt, Germany. In 1993, Secretary of Defense Les Aspin lifts the restrictions and allows women to fly combat aircraft. So in 1995, Gilda Jackson was the first African-American female Marine colonel and the first woman to command a naval aviation depot in Cherry Point, North Carolina. In 1996, Marine Corps Lieutenant General Carol Mutter becomes the first female 3-star officer in the U.S. Armed Forces as she assumes the position of Deputy Chief of Staff for Manpower and Reserves Affairs at the headquarters of the Marine Corps in Washington, D.C. In 1997, Karen Fuller Brannon made history. On October 17, 1997, she becomes the first U.S. Marine Corps strike fighter pilot to earn Wings of Gold. That same year, the first group of women Marines completes in male-female integrated Marine combat training course at Camp Geiger, North Carolina, with Melissa Ohm as the honor guard. Lance Corporal Melissa Ohm as honor guard. In 1997, Gunnery Sergeant Patricia Crimmins becomes the first female Marine to earn the Drum Major Military Occupation Specialty. That same year, Jennifer Lamb is the first woman attached to an infantry company. In 1999, Sergeant Kelly L. Anderson is the first female to successfully complete designated marksmanship school at Fleet Combat Training Center in Dam Neck, Virginia. So the 90s is women are slowly being given training in weaponry and slowly being moved towards positions where they would be seeing combat and more active fighting jobs. Now, as we move into the 2000s and the War on Terror, women are gonna see more of those roles. It is the 2001, September 11th happens and the War on Terror begins in earnest. In that same year, 2001, Captain Ernest Ammer becomes the first African-American pilot for the U.S. Marine Corps, and in 2003, she is the first African-American combat pilot with a combat mission in Iraq. In 2002, Sergeant Jeanette Winters is the first U.S. servicewoman to die in the War on Terror. In 2005, Chaplain Ramona M. Valdez and Lance Corporal Holly A. Charlotte are the first women Marine killed in Iraq when an improvised explosive device, or IED, as you hear about them on the news, detonated near their convoy vehicle in Fallujah, Iraq. Now in 2006, after a 32-year career, Angela Salinas becomes the first female Hispanic brigadier general in the Marine Corps. In 2006 as well, Major Megan McClung becomes the first female Marine Corps officer to be killed in Iraq during Operation Iraqi Freedom. And in 2009, an all-female Marine team conducts its first missions in southern Afghanistan. And as we continue on into this next decade, in 2012, the first female Marine takes the combat leadership test. In 2012, Corporal Page, a stableman with MCG aboard the Marine Corps Logistics Base, Barstow, California, is one of the first women to receive official orders of their unit, which had previously only been given to infantrymen. So they gave her an order to be given to her unit. Usually they would only do that with infantrymen or men. In 2013, Marine Lieutenant Colonel Nicole A. Mann was selected in June of 2013 as one of the 8 members of the 21st NASA astronaut class. In 2013, Gunnery Sergeant Robin Baker is the first female with the rank of combat engineer. Baker also holds first as the first female master breacher after successfully completing the Marine Corps Urban Breachers course, and one of the only 2 female Marines to ever teach at combat engineering school. The first 3 female Marines graduated from the Marine Corps Enlisted Infantry Training Course in 2013. Private First Class Cristina Fuentes Montenegro, Private First Class Julia Carroll, and Private First Class Katie Gores. The first female Marine officers and drill instructors, there are 7 of them, were permanently assigned to the Marine Corps RDSDU Depot Western Recruiting Region to work with the male battalions in 2016. The first female armor officer, 2nd Lieutenant Liliane Polachek, graduated from Army-led Basic Armor Leaders course at Fort Benning, Georgia in 2017 and became the first woman to lead a Marine tank platoon. Also in 2017, a lot of things happened in 2017. Private First Class Maria Duam was the first female Marine to join the infantry through the traditional entry-level training process. Basically, she went to a Marine recruiter and said, "I want to be in the infantry," and they said, "Cool," and she just went through. In 2017, Gunnery Sergeant Stacy Crowder is the first female assistant drum major for the President's own United States Marine Corps Band. And September 25th, 2017, the first female Marine graduates from Marine Corps' demanding infantry officer courses graduated. Also in 2017, the first female Marine Corps officers graduated from Amphibian Assault School. Colonel Lorna M. Malachuk was the first African American woman to earn the rank of Brigadier General in April of 2018. That June, Lieutenant Colonel Michelle McCaster took over command of 1st Command Engineering Battalion at Camp Pendleton, and this is the first time a female Marine has ever been named a commander of the ground combat arms units. Lieutenant Marina Hurl becomes the first and only woman in the Marine Corps to lead an infantry platoon in August of 2018. Now in 2019, Lance Corporal Megan Bowden is the first female singer for the vocalist military occupation specialty. It's 2020. Now, 2020 wasn't a great year for everybody, but there were some things that happened in the Marines. In February of 2020, Chief Warrant Officer Fort Karen DeMora makes history by being the first female commanding officer of a Marine Corps correctional facility when she took command of the Camp Pendleton Brig, so Marine jail. In May of 2020, Sergeant Alyssa Triplett becomes the first ever female to graduate from Scout Swimmers course, a highly demanding course designed to teach Marines specialized amphibious abilities. As of 2020, about 9% of the 185,000 Marines in the Marine Corps are women. Now, this is the lowest ratio of any of the branches of service. I'm sure the number of firsts for women in the Marine Corps will go down as all of the branches of service becomes more normal to see women in these different jobs. It's only 2016 where every single job opened up to women. So it'll just start feeling commonplace rather than special. Every veteran of every branch of service deserves to be thanked and recognized for their service. But female veterans do even more, since half the time the world assumes that it's her husband who's the veteran rather than her. My mom wears a shirt that says I'm a veteran because of this. Even though my dad's a veteran too, but still. People don't even realize that she was a veteran as well unless they know her. So from the Sexy Politico to every veteran out there is thank you for your service. Well, that's it for the Sexy Politico podcast. Thank you for listening. Please rate this podcast and leave a review. If you are able, please think about supporting us on Patreon or on this platform. We're hoping to expand in the near future. Share this podcast with your friends, your enemies, your neighbors, whoever, and leave a comment about what you'd like to listen to next. Our socials are in the show description. Thank you for listening. Stay safe. Stay sexy. Bye.